Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today with me is Annie Dean, the VP of Team Anywhere at Atlassian. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about what Atlassian does for those folks who don't know. By the way, I use Atlassian extensively. Trello is the background on which my own consultancy runs, so I know it well. But for those who don't know it, tell us a little bit about what it does.
Love Trello. So Atlassian is a suite of products that powers teamwork, especially in a distributed environment. Some of our most famous products are Jira, which is how software engineers really collaborate and connect. We have Trello. My favorite is Confluence, which is a way of kind of using pages and documents to organize and share information. So many opportunities and products to check out on our website.
Now, Atlassian works in a remote-first manner, but it does have a number of offices. Tell me a little bit about your structure and why you chose that structure. What does it mean to be remote-first? Why do you have offices? And just how do you function?
Great question. So we have adopted a talent strategy internally called Team Anywhere. And the reason why we created Team Anywhere, which is what we call our distributed location strategy, enables us to get the best talent from anywhere, to keep our employees super engaged. 92% of Atlassians are saying that a reason why they stay at Atlassian is because of our Team Anywhere program. And we were named the #7 best place to work last year. So it's really resonating with our people. And then the third reason why we adopted it is because we are a company that powers tools that support distributed teams. And we wanted to make sure that we could solve problems a few steps ahead of our customers. So in defining what that policy looks like, we have about kind of 10 big decisions that we made. And every company made these decisions, but I think Atlassian took a more progressive stance than most in the way that we designed our offering. The first is that employees can choose where they work every single day. Office attendance is never mandatory. And this gives us the opportunity to free kind of our talent sourcing strategy from our office hubs. And it also gives people the chance to choose where they live. That said, about 70% of people still come to the office every quarter anyway, because we make our offices a great experience. Some of the other key factors of Team Anywhere are things like our 90-day rule, which is what I'm using right now. So you can work from a different location than your home location up to 90 days per year. We give people support in setting up their home office. We organize teams by time zones to make sure that collaboration is still easy by default, and a few other big kind of topic areas. But given that you now have kind of that framework and overview, why do we have offices? Well, our offices are really about connecting. And they're a way for people to go get their work done if that's the format or place that best suits them. So we use our offices as a way for instance, in New York, we have a big intern class right now who is coming in a lot of the time, as well as a new grad cohort that tends to prefer coming into the office as opposed to working remotely, probably in part because they don't have a lot of space at home. And then we also use our offices to support what we call team gatherings. So one of the big parts of our program is to keep people connected. We have whole teams come and travel together. They stay at the office from anywhere from 2 days to 5 days, and work together on big problems and hang out together and build great connection. So New York City is not our most populated region, for instance. I talk about New York because it's my home office. We tend to have a much bigger presence on the West Coast and in Sydney, which is where our company was founded. But 50% of the people who visit New York are coming in from out of town. And they're doing that because they're participating in team gatherings. So that's another critical way that we use our offices. Offices are an amazing way to make sure that people understand and feel a brand experience of being part of Atlassian. and also get to connect with teammates that they, wouldn't otherwise see. So for us, offices are really working for us, and we've been able to design a flexible and impactful office footprint post-pandemic.
Now, something you didn't mention, and something, so I helped 24 by now companies transition to figuring out their hybrid and remote models. And the thing that I focus on every time they find that they struggle actually the most with is managers, that middle management level, because the managers don't really know how to lead teams in a remote setting or in a hybrid setting or whatever model the company chooses that I'm working with, because they're used to leading in a in-person setting, that office-centric setting, and they just don't know how to make sure that people are productive, how to manage performance, how to facilitate collaboration, communication in those settings where people are working remotely part or all of the time. So what did you do, or what are you doing to help your managers actually successfully lead in that pretty flexible environment that you have?
This is a very important question. And I think the highest level answer is that the problems that you just raised, that middle managers feel squeezed, they don't feel fully equipped or trained in how to lead in this environment, are all problems that exist inside and outside of offices. So using an office to solve these problems isn't going to increase or change manager outcomes from my perspective. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about this time is the recognition that we have an opportunity to redesign how work gets done. We know that there are a lot of challenges as to how work gets done in this modern, globalized, predominantly distributed environment. And so, people need support. And I think we are starting to begin to design what that future looks like. We have a hypothesis internally, and this is kind of not something that is fully baked at all, but we're looking across 3 elements of time, clarity, and connection that we want to help all teams get better at approaching. And I think this in particular helps managers get smart about how to lead their teams differently in this environment. So when I say time, I mean that today, our hypothesis is that a lot of teams spend their time in the wrong ways. They're in meetings every single day, back to back in 30 minutes. They're just kind of working through to-do lists. They're not spending the time doing the highest priority work and really getting the focus time to drive that forward. So we want to help managers and teams adopt practices that redeploy time in a new way. The way that I do this on my team is that I ask everyone to keep 50% of their day unreserved. And this is either for focus time, so doing the hardest work and solving the hardest problems, or it enables us to say, there's been a change, there's a high priority topic that we need to fit in this week. How are we going to do that? And that gives us the flexibility to always prioritize the most important tasks. In the old model, those important tasks were not getting prioritized for 3 to 4 weeks on a calendar, and they just move too slowly. Then there's clarity, which is all about what is the outcome that we're working towards. So, right now, and I know that we probably should talk about this in a dedicated way, even in this conversation, but people are really focused on productivity. They're focused on whether or not people's butts are in seats. But obviously, and I think it's well accepted that we all need to be talking more about outcomes and goals. So we want to equip managers to be able to more clearly identify the goals that they have and make sure that all of their weekly work is oriented towards achievement or attainment of those goals. We have a great tool called Atlas and a program at Atlassian called a unified OKR structure, where every single project at the company rolls up into one of 3 top level objectives of the company. And you can view those projects and their connection to the higher level goals at any time. So on Monday mornings, I get a digest of every single project linked to each of those goals. And as a manager, I'm able to, track how those things are going. That creates visibility in this different world. And then the last thing is connection. Do you know the people that you need to know to get the work done, to get the information that you need, and have a good experience? And, studies have shown over the course of the pandemic and this large experiment with distributed work that the quality of networks does change and it becomes more siloed. So we want to help managers figure out how to equip their teams with the right introductions and connections to make sure that they know the cross-functional partners that are going to support and unblock them. So that continues to be an important objective. We're studying each of these pillars and figuring out what interventions and experiments might lead to better outcomes. And I'd welcome anyone watching this show to offer whether they think this is a good framework going forward.
Now, let's talk a little bit more about productivity, and specifically something I found, again, with my clients, but also there's a new research paper that came out from Nick Bloom, Jose Barrero, and several other top researchers on actually remote work, distributed work, whatever you want to call it, that finds that there are certain tasks better done in person, and there are certain tasks better done remotely. Now, what they found that overall, if you work just full-time remote, you have lower productivity in the long term because you have less collaboration and you have more difficulty coordinating. But you have much higher return on investment because you don't have office space and a lot of other expenses. The office-centric work is work that's kind of medium productivity. So if you have remote capable people, and hybrid work where people can work some of their time remotely and some of their time in the office is actually the most productive work. Now, why is that? And this is something I've seen time and time again in my clients, talking about the specific types of work that are better done in the office. And this is something I have to really train managers on. So there are three types of activities that are best done at home. One is that individual focused head down work that we talked about, right? That head down work. The second is asynchronous communication, where people, let's say, are collaborating on Trello or Jira or so on, or their Microsoft Teams, email, asynchronous communication. And third is video conferences. So video conferences, phone calls, you don't need to be in the office and distracting everyone with talking over your video conference. And there are four things that generally are better done in the office. So the first thing is more intense synchronous communication, where you collaborate more face-to-face, more intensely. Second is nuanced conversation about performance evaluations, conflict management, maybe a leader like you communicating their strategy to their team. The third is socializing and team bonding. So kind of those team gatherings that you mentioned, that's really valuable to build up trust and connections. And fourth is mentoring and on-the-job training. So especially for junior people, you talked about the intern class, that's very helpful to begin mentoring in person. If you do some virtual mentoring, that's great, but having that initial building up of trust in person and just quickly answering questions with on-the-job training. So what are you thinking? That's kind of the framework that I've seen work well in terms of productivity and driving outcomes. What are you seeing at Atlassian? How are you thinking about what to do in the office, what to do at home, how to train managers on what to do in each place?
I love everything that you just shared, and I'll kind of react to it kind of in pieces. So in your framework of kind of what's better to do in the office versus what's better to do in person, what better to do at home versus what's better to do in person, I agree with you. Fundamentally, what you shared is nuanced, unstructured conversation is great in an in-person setting. And we have studied how our team gatherings support those outcomes versus office attendance. And what we found is that team gatherings, so coming together intensely for a working week or so with a team, drives connection by about 30% and maintains that connection for 4 to 5 months. We then looked at office attendance and whether sporadic office attendance, and remember in our model, it's not mandated, drives any of the team connection outcomes. And we actually found that it drove no outcome whatsoever. And that's really interesting. So I think that one of the assumptions, going back to my days as an attorney and thinking about hidden assumptions, the assumption that mandatory office attendance drives any of the positive outcomes, I think is something that we overassume about. I'm not sure that that's the reality. And looking back at the recent study that showed that, fully remote environments are less impactful overall. One, I think we're measuring kind of environments that are not fully optimized for a distributed model. No fault of anyone, because we're all still figuring out what implementation looks like. And I do think some of these things are, using call center and other very objectively observable outcome-based organizations, to draw some of these conclusions. And that isn't always relevant in a more traditional, at scale knowledge work and technology company. But I think when you look at those, again, there's kind of this faulty assumption that coordination requires mandatory in-person office attendance. To me, we can absolutely figure out how to coordinate our efforts in a virtual setting. And when we think about, so what does that look like for us? How do we make sure that we're productive and attaining our goals in this environment? We are clear about those goals, so I think it's about going back to what we were talking about before, having a lot of clarity about what we're trying to achieve, and making sure that we have a system of accountability to those goals. So for us, it's an OKR framework with updates in Atlas, like I shared before, and a monthly scoring system. And we teach managers to make sure that they are participating in that process and that they can describe their team's success in those, in those terms. But we're not asking them to say, what hours were your developers working? And, are people, like other tech companies, saying that attending the office is going to be part of their performance review? Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And there's only one thing that I would circle back on. So I think team connection, you're absolutely right. Like what the research shows is that the people who are already have connections, they don't need as much time in the office. The research that I'm talking about, the challenge with fully remote work, which you don't have, is that the fully remote workers who are younger, they didn't learn as much. And so that their performance suffered, and that was the main component. So mentoring and on-the-job training, there's definitely challenges with doing that fully remotely. Because if you think of what mentoring involves, so having a mentor and a mentee, they need to form a relationship that's close and nuanced, because the mentee needs to acknowledge some vulnerabilities about things they don't know. And it's really hard to form that relationship when you meet a person as a square on the screen, right? You can, but it takes more effort, it takes more time, and it takes certain personalities. There are certain personalities I find, we can talk about personalities, that have a real difficult time establishing closer relationships with people who they only meet remotely. And so that's, I think, a big challenge in terms of, you talked about team connection, but the learning, I think, is what those studies were getting at, that there's a big challenge. So I find that it's really helpful for interns, for newer folks, but even people who are there for 1, 2, 3 years, to have some time when they're developing relationships with mentors, to have some time in the office with a mentor. It doesn't have to be in the office, can be just in person. And then they can continue their mentoring relationship virtually once they develop that relationship of trust. What are you finding?
It's interesting. I wouldn't say that we have this fully cracked, and I absolutely agree and acknowledge that mentorship and on-the-job learning needs new opportunities and focus. But we did just evaluate and have not made a decision. But just this week, I was talking about, all right, so how do we support new grads and getting them up to speed as quickly as possible? And we looked at things like, should we offer to have them be located near an office community? What at their own choice, if they choose to be part of an office community because it works best for them, should we support that? Or should we look at just upping the ante on bringing them together into a team gathering setting? And when we looked at the research, again, team gathering, so the idea of more targeted, intentional time together on a more sporadic basis, seemed to be the right way to support that initiative. So we're thinking, again, we're just tossing around ideas, but we're thinking about building a program by which people are part of a facilitated kind of learning on an ongoing basis with their manager or whoever is the best equipped to be teaching them in whatever role they're in. So I do think probably some unstructured in-person time is part of the solution to training, learning, and skill development. But I'm also really encouraged by tools like Gong for sales leaders, for instance, where there's a repeatable process. You can throw it into a reviewable format. and people can comment and help nudge you and train you. I also think that there is a totally different level of access that we used to have. So it took me probably 10 years of my career, maybe 8, to get into the room with a CEO. And I started to learn a lot about business as soon as I got access to those high-level business leaders. But anyone at Atlassian, no matter what level they are, can see videos of the most important meetings that occur at Atlassian. So one of the things that I ask my team to review is that for any session that is recorded for our product leadership team, I ask them to review it so that we can, first of all, you learn how an executive operates. You learn about key strategic information in our business. Some things are so sensitive that they're not shared, but often people have an incredible amount of access. And I do think that being somebody where it used to be that the gunner, new hire figured out how to go meet the boss and get invited to the happy hour, but maybe the gunner of tomorrow is somebody who's figuring out where to go find all of the information and to educate his or herself or themselves, and figure out how to use that all to their advantage, because there is an enormous amount of information and transparency available today that just wasn't 5 years ago.
I think that really makes a lot of sense, that there's a lot of resources that younger employees can use to learn, or newly hired employees who are more senior.
Right.
Well, as we're wrapping up and thinking about the future, what do you see as the future of distributed work at Atlassian and more broadly?
I love this question. I love that you asked the future of distributed work. I do think that the conversation needs to be about distributed. My hypothesis, and I wonder if you agree, is that every company at scale is a distributed company. I think the research shows that we're fantasizing about co-location, but at the end of the day, people in an office, when they're more than 30 feet apart, are essentially not co-located and may as well be on a Zoom together. So, I think that gaining awareness that this is an opportunity to really rethink how work gets done and to move away from kind of the office versus no office debate, where I'd really like to see the conversation go. And my hope is that we learn to work in a really empowering and more effective way, that we get to solve harder problems in less time and have a better quality of life, and more interesting companies solving bigger things instead of just being reactive. That's where I'd love to see the world go, and I'm hopeful that it will. What do you think?
I think that we're pretty clearly seeing that there are some of, traditionalist leaders who are not comfortable with leading people when they are working remotely. So I think it will take some time for that generation of leaders to go their way, as all generations do. And we're clearly seeing that younger leaders, folks like you, folks like I, are more comfortable leading people when they're working remotely. Of course, I have a number of clients who are quite experienced, who are very senior, and who are very comfortable with remote work. But there is definitely a generational divide. And I see that as being really important. That's kind of part of the future. You're absolutely right. Any company at scale is a distributed company, but there are leaders who think very differently about a distributed company when there are people in the office versus not. So there are some companies, large companies, which are quite flexible, like Microsoft, and others like Google, which are not very flexible at all, even though their products, just like yours, are meant both to solve the problem of people working in a distributed setting. So I think that's going to be really leadership dependent, and that transition will have to take place. Clearly, it's the case. I just had a Fortune article published, which is the most popular article in Fortune, my editor just told me, which very clearly showed that companies that are more restrictive have much more problems with their retention and recruitment. So the talent is flowing to companies like Atlassian, like as you mentioned, and others, which are more flexible. That's right. And these are the companies that will win the talent wars in the long run. So that's kind of another dimension which I think about. So I think about the generational leadership dimension, and I think about where the workers are actually going. So the future And the third dimension that I think about is the growing role of artificial intelligence. Because artificial intelligence, there's no question about it, it will make it easier for people to work remotely. So I just talked about getting information, getting into the room, right? Artificial intelligence will make it much easier for people to get information, to condense information, to coordinate with each other, which is one of the problems that we talked about, to get clarity, to connect their activities to the OKRs of the company, and to just have those connections. So that is a future AI and other technologies that are coming online. There are more and more patents for remote facilitating technologies, so that technology will facilitate more remote work in the future. That's the third dimension that I think about, and that's what I think distributed work is setting.
Excellent. Well, I love to hear that and agree with you on AI, and a very important call out. I think it's all about doing better work in less time and prioritizing what matters faster. And AI is really going to help do that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Annie. This was a very helpful conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and helps us improve the show. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. In the meantime, the wisest and most profitable decisions to you, my friends.